All right. Um, this coming Sunday in the Hebrew calendar will be the ninth day of the Hebrew month Av. And it was on this day in 586 that the Babylonians destroyed Solomon's temple. It was on this same day in AD 70 that the Romans destroyed Herod's temple. 656 years apart, the two temples were destroyed on the same day of the year. And so this is said to be the saddest day of the year for the Jewish people. It's really amazing that both destructions happened on the same day of the year. All right, we are going to be looking at textual criticism. And let me go ahead and start the screen share. I had a really bad time last night with Zoom. And I wasn't able to see the students most of the time, but I worked on it this afternoon. Hopefully I figured out something that will help. So we will see. So we'll go ahead and start the screen share. All right, let me plug in my monitor. And we'll see if we can get this to work. So just be patient with me here and we'll see if we can get it going. Okay, can you see the screen share? Is it full screen, or do you see it? It's not enlarged, huh?
Not enlarged, sir.
Okay. I don't know why. This afternoon, it worked fine in my experiments. So let me try this again. Hold on.
Doctor?
Yes.
I drank coffee and I'm awake now.
Well, good. I'm glad you're awake. I'm glad you're with us. All right. Well, I enlarged. Do you have the screen share full, the full picture? Okay. Problem is that I can't. Oh, hold on a second. Hold on. Maybe we can get this to work. All right. Is it still large? Okay. Well, it's working right now. So I think the key is to enlarge it and then plug in the monitor. And let me turn on my light here as well. There's got to be a simpler way to do this. All right. The joys of technology. Okay. Textual criticism of the New Testament. Does anybody know what we mean when we talk about textual criticism? Let me start off with a question then. Where did we get our New Testament? I guess we'll make this a rhetorical question. The apostles didn't just sit down and write a book and send it to the publisher, and it got published and distributed, and here we have the New Testament. Rather, let's say the Apostle Paul writes a letter to the church in Corinth. He may have written 2 copies, one for himself and one to send. That was often done in those days with letter writing. But he sends the letter to Corinth, and someone wants a copy. How do they get a copy of it? There are no photocopy machines. It has to be done by hand. So let me see if I can illustrate it here. This little ball here that I'm making is the letter that Paul wrote to the Corinthians. But somebody wants a copy. And so they make a copy, and somebody else wants a copy, and they make a copy. We now have 3 copies, the original and 2 copies. But somebody else wants a copy of one of those, and maybe of this one as well. And so as time goes by, we have many copies. And when these copies are made, errors creep in because nobody is perfect in what they copy. And I'm sure that you have found that true in when you've done that kind of thing. You leave out words, you misspell words, you put the same word in twice, and that kind of thing happens. So after a few years, there are many copies. What then, how do we decide which one is most like the original? That is the role of textual criticism, to help us get back to the original document as Paul wrote it. So you can see this is a very important technique here. It's important for us to be able to get as accurate a text as possible. By the way, we don't have all of the letters that Paul wrote. We know that he wrote at least 4 letters to the Corinthians. He wrote what we call the previous letter, and then he wrote our First Corinthians, and then one called the severe letter, and then our Second Corinthians. So we know of 4 letters that Paul wrote to Corinth. Only 2 of them were kept. And of course, that's our First and Second Corinthians. This process is called lower criticism. Higher criticism would deal with authorship and date and all that kind of thing. Lower criticism is textual criticism. Let's see if I can go to the next slide here. I guess I should erase this. Okay. Textual criticism has been defined as the study of the manuscript evidence for a written work of which the original is no longer extant, that is, we don't have it, with the intent of discerning the original text. The science of studying ancient writing is called paleography. Let's look at the materials that were used in writing the manuscripts of the New Testament. Almost all of the earlier New Testament manuscripts were written on papyrus or parchment. Papyrus was a plant that grew plentifully along the marshes of the Nile River. In Job 8:11, it says in the Septuagint, "Can papyrus grow tall where there is no marsh?" So the papyrus is actually mentioned in the Bible. It grew to be about 4 or 5 meters high and about 3 inches wide. It was cut into sections about a foot long. The sections were split open and the pith inside, the material inside, was cut into strips. Now, the Greek word for this pith was biblos. Maybe that sounds familiar. They were placed on a flat surface with all of the fibers running one direction. On top of that, they placed another layer with the fibers running in the opposite direction. So that it's like this and then like this on top of it. The finished product then was very strong. Papyrus was used for about 3,500 years. The word biblos refers to the papyrus plant and then came to mean a scroll or book. The diminutive form biblion referred to a strip of papyrus, and later, like biblos, it came to refer to the scroll or the codex. The plural of the word biblion is the word biblia. Biblia. Has anybody ever heard of that word? Roel, have you heard of that word?
Yes, sir. Bible, sir.
Okay. In Tagalog, in Spanish, Biblia is the word for Bible. And it comes from this word that means papyrus. Beginning around the first part of the 4th century, manuscripts came to be written on parchment. Parchment was more durable than papyrus, and it could easily be written on both sides. The process for making parchment was perfected at Pergamum. In fact, the English word parchment comes from the word pergamum. It was made from skins of young cattle, sheep, or goats, or antelopes. It was not just leather, but it was high quality leather. It is said that it took the skins of 90 animals to make one parchment copy of the Bible. That means that it would be quite expensive to purchase even part of the Bible in parchment form. It's been estimated that just for Paul's 13 letters, the cost would be $10,129 US. So, it wasn't just something you could run down to the Bible bookstore and pick up for a couple dollars. It was very expensive. Vellum was the highest quality of extra thin parchment. And the younger the animal, the better the quality. And parchment was sometimes made from unborn animals. Later deluxe editions were dyed purple, and inscribed with gold or silver ink. Ordinary editions were written with black or brown ink, with perhaps decorative parts of it written in red, but sometimes in yellow or blue. Eventually, the words parchment and vellum came to mean the same thing, so they're sometimes used interchangeably. Almost all manuscripts from the 4th to the 14th centuries were made of parchment. So first of all, we have papyrus. And then in around the 4th century, we start having parchment. And then later on, during the Middle Ages, we have paper. Paper was made of cotton, hemp, or flax. So that is what they write on, either papyrus, parchment, or paper. The pens that scribes used to write with were made of a thin reed, sharpened at the point, with a small split in the middle. You know, when I was in elementary school, we had inkwells. And these inkwells, there was a hole in our desk, a hole about this big. And in the hole, they would put a bottle of ink. And we would have pens that had a point, looked sort of like this, and you would dip it in the ink, and then you would write on your paper. And it was really neat because if you pressed it hard, the two pieces on each side of the slit there would come apart, and you could write double, you know, so it was fun for us kids. But that's very similar to what the scribes wrote on back in the ancient times. It was a reed, and then it was cut, made a point, and then the point was cut in two, and they would dip it in the ink, and they would write, and then they would dip it again and write again. The ink that the scribes used was made from soot with gum and water. So soot, what's left after you burn something, the ashes. They would take that and they would put it with gum and water and make ink. Okay, do you have questions or comments here before we go on? Okay. Roel, did you have a question?
Yes, sir. I'm just thinking. Those those papers are like parchment or papyrus. Can no for preservation or
You broke up
that's what
there,
lasted.
and I couldn't hear all that you said. Could you say it again?
Yes, sir. Sir, the else like the papyrus, the parchment, they're all no chemicals, or they just natural made from from the skin of the animal. So let's say that made them preserve for many years.
It would be preserved for many years. However, in the Mediterranean area, it was quite damp. And so it would eventually disintegrate. The old manuscripts that we have come from Egypt. So they, the old manuscripts are Egyptian. Now they may have been made elsewhere, but only the ones that made their way to Egypt have survived. We do have those in the Qumran caves that survived, but that is a very dry area, very much like Egypt. So in most places like, you know, Rome, Corinth, Athens, a manuscript is not going to survive forever there, even in Jerusalem. So it's only in certain places where they will survive. Yeah.
Sir, therefore the environment also is a factor whenever those manuscripts gonna last or not. It depends also with the environment.
I would think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although they didn't have the pollution probably like we have today,
Mm,
fluorocarbons and all that kind of thing. Yeah, yeah. And,
thank you, sir. Yeah.
you also need to consider that after the Roman government turned against the church, they did their best to destroy manuscripts. So the Roman government actually destroyed many manuscripts of the Christian scriptures. Yeah. Okay, let's look at the form of the books. First of all, the scroll. The papyrus roll or scroll was made by gluing together side by side separate sheets of papyrus and winding them around a stick. So let me see. Okay, let me see if I can illustrate that.
Doctor,
Yes.
is it similar to spring roll? Spring roll. Is it
Spring
similar
roll.
to spring roll?
Oh, well.
Like that? Like that?
Well, yes. What they would do is take the pieces of papyrus and put them out like this, stitch them together, and then they would put a stick at the end and they would wind it around the stick. So it would be a roll like this. Yeah, sort of like a huge spring roll, Moon. And that was the first kind of form of book that they used in the church. Now, the maximum length was about 11 meters. So both Luke and Acts would just about fit a maximum, what would fit on a roll. So that's probably why Luke made a 2-volume work. He could put Luke on one scroll and he could put Acts on the other. The columns were about 2.5 to 3.5 inches, 6 to 9 centimeters wide. Sometimes, though not very often, scrolls would be written on both the front and the back. In Revelation 5:1, it says, "Then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals." So usually it's only written on the inside, but you could write on the outside of the scroll as well. And that is what we have there in Revelation 5:1. Now, the next form is that of the codex. Okay, let me see if I can go on here. Will this let me go on? Okay. Okay, and I will have to erase this. I tell you what, before I erase it, with the codex, instead of putting them out like that, they would stack them one on top of the other. So they would make a stack of pages, papyrus sheets, and then they would either sew them together on one end so that they have a book like we have today, or they would bend them in the end, put them one on top of the other, and sew it along the middle there. So this is called the codex. So early in the 2nd century, the codex came to be used. Now, actually, the church was in the forefront of technology here because the codex was recently invented. And in fact, the church developed a better codex than they had in the general culture. So the church was high tech in making the codex. The codex was easier to use than the scroll. I mean, think of having to look up a verse with a big scroll. You know, if you want Isaiah 61:1, that's what Jesus preached from in the synagogue. And imagine them having to go over to the scroll and find Isaiah 61:1. If it was a codex, it would be a lot easier. It was also less expensive to make a codex than a scroll. So the use of the codex in the church distinguished it from the synagogue where they continued to use the scrolls. Of the 172 manuscripts or fragments from before the year 400, 158 are from codexes, and 14 are from scrolls. Now let's look at the copying process. Copies were made word by hand. Manuscripts were copied in one of two ways. The individual could do it himself, so he would read one manuscript and then write what he just wrote on a blank manuscript, or there could be a group of scribes and one person could read and the others listen to what he says and write it down. Now, at first, the copies were made just by those who were interested. But in the ancient world, there was an industry of manuscript copying done by highly trained scribes. The church, however, at least at the beginning, did not have access to those professionals, although by the 4th century, professional scribes generally made the copies. So several scribes would sit in a room. One person would read, and he would read it aloud, but errors would occur. A cough could obstruct somebody's hearing. Also, some words have the same pronunciation. Which one did the scribe who is speaking mean? They may be spelled differently. And so the one who's writing it down has to decide which word does he mean. Now, after the copies were made, they were gone over by a corrector. Sometimes a monk would copy by themselves in their cell, and they would do it with this process. They would read it to themselves, retain the material in their memory, dictate the material again to themselves, and then write it. Until the early Middle Ages, it was customary for scribes to stand for brief notes. For longer writing, they would sit on a stool, a bench, or the ground with the writing material on their knees. And here is a copy of an ancient scribe writing, and you can see he has it on his knees. Now that could be very taxing, very tiring. This process was used until the invention of the printing press in the 16th century. Okay, let me just pause and see if you have any questions or comments here. Okay. There are basically two kinds of Greek writing styles that are important for us. There are others, but they're not, they don't pertain to us particularly. There are the uncials or the majuscules, and these are like capital letters. They were written on papyrus or parchment. Now, the word uncial means 12th, signifying the fact that there were usually 12 letters in a column. Uncial handwriting was used until the 10th century. Recently, the word majuscules has been used for uncials. I don't know why the terminology is changing, but these are sort of in capital letters. We also have minuscules, and this is a special form of cursive that became very popular around the end of the 8th or the beginning of the 9th century. It was quicker and more writing could be put on a page. It was also less expensive to produce. Now, it should be noted here that there was no division between words. All the letters were written together as if it were just one word. There was also very little in the way of punctuation, very little in the way of commas, periods, and question mark. There was some punctuation, but not nearly like we have today. Neither were there chapter and verse divisions of the Bible. They were introduced beginning in the 4th century. The system of chapters that we use today came from Stephen Langdon at the beginning of the 13th century. The first Greek New Testament to have verse divisions was one published in 1551 by Robert Stephanus. And these are the verse divisions that we use today. Stephanus's son reported that his father made the verse divisions as he traveled from Paris to Lyon. And people have written stories about how Robert Stephanus was on a horseback and he had his manuscript here and he was making verse divisions as he traveled on his horse, you know, bouncing up and down. And especially if people think he didn't do a very good job, well, they'll say, no wonder he was riding on a horse. But actually, that's probably not the way it was. Probably what his son meant was that in the inns at night, he would do the verse divisions, not riding on his horse. Okay, so we have two kinds of script, in uncials or majuscules and minuscules. There are basically four kinds of manuscripts. We have papyri. These are the oldest, and they're called that because they were written on papyrus. Papyrus manuscripts are designated by a German P with a superscript, like P52 or P12 or whatever the number of the papyrus happens to be. The only New Testament book or books that are not found on a papyrus manuscript are 1st and 2nd Timothy. They start with parchment. So the first kind of manuscript is papyrus. The second is what we call uncial or majuscule manuscripts. Only one uncial manuscript preserves the entire New Testament, and that is Codex Sinaiticus. And we'll talk about some of the individual manuscripts in a little bit. Uncial manuscripts are designated by a number with a 0 in front of it, or a capital letter, like manuscript A, manuscript B, manuscript Aleph. Sinaiticus is Aleph, or C, or D, or on down through the alphabet. Now, there are only 26 letters in the alphabet, and
Excuse
so
me.
they came up with numbers. Yes.
So in the place of uncial, can we also write codex? In,
No, because codex is the form of the manuscript.
Okay.
So you could have papyrus codexes, you could have parchment codexes. So yeah, we can't really interchange that terminology there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Uh-huh. Now here is a picture of a uncial or majuscule manuscript. Notice how the words are all together. They're not divided. There's very little punctuation. And this is the actual copy of Matthew 1:1 to 3a in Codex Vaticanus. So if you look at the upper left side, you might be able to see BIB, Biblos, and then it goes on, the book of the generations of Jesus Christ, and goes on like that. That is what a uncial manuscript looks like. And then we come to minuscule manuscripts. This also refers to the kind of writing that is used. It began in the 9th century and was used until the 15th century. Minuscule manuscripts are designated by a number without a zero on the beginning. And the final, this is a picture of a minuscule manuscript. It's much more intricate, much more detailed, and to me, much harder to read than an uncial or majuscule manuscript. This is Matthew 1:1 to 3a from Codex 774. And we just showed you the one in the uncial form, and that is much easier to read than this. At least for me it is. So here's a comparison between the two. And then we have lectionaries. These were scripture passages used in the worship of the church. Now the lectionaries date from the 8th to the 16th century. And they are designated by a cursive L followed by a number. So the papyri are the oldest. Uncials went from the 4th to the 10th centuries, minuscules from the 9th century and later. Now, these statistics I'm giving right here are a little dated, 1976. But in the left column, we have the kind of manuscript: papyri, uncial, minuscule, and lectionaries. And then in the middle column, how many of those are in uncial script? Well, all 88 of the papyri are in uncial script. And of course, all the uncial manuscripts are in uncial script. All the minuscule manuscripts are in minuscule script. And the lectionaries are divided. The older ones are in uncial, and the later ones are in minuscule. So we have a total in 1976 of 607 uncial script manuscripts and 4,759 minuscule script manuscripts. Now, As of 2011, there were a total of 127 papyri, 322 uncials, 2,910 minuscules, and 2,453 lectionaries, a total of 5,812. As of February 2021, there were 5,916 manuscripts. 5,916. So we've added about 100 in the last decade. The oldest manuscript that we have is P52. This is a papyrus manuscript, generally dated around 125. So it's very early, very early. It's a portion of the Gospel of John. And it's very small. But, you know, there used to be people saying that the Gospel of John wasn't written until the middle of the 2nd century. Well, too bad they didn't have this, because this disproves it. This was probably written in Ephesus. It was copied. This was found down in Egypt. So this is a very early manuscript. Now, we should note also that there are other kinds of textual evidence. There are versions, that is, translations of the Greek New Testament books in other languages. The most notable ones are Latin, Syriac, and Coptic. There are also what we call patristic citations, that is, quotations in the church fathers. Church fathers such as Irenaeus, Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, Origen, Cyprian. And it's been said that if all the copies of the New Testament were destroyed, all the Greek manuscripts, that we could still come up with virtually the whole New Testament from the patristic citations, because they quoted the New Testament so much. Now, in times of economic depression, parchment was reused. The older script was scraped or washed off, and the new was written over it. And a book like this is called a palimpsest. Of the 322 uncials, 68 are palimpsests. Now, through using ultraviolet light, they can get back to what the original script was. Sometimes scribes made notes in the margins or the end of their manuscripts. An Armenian manuscript says that a heavy snowstorm was raging outside. The ink froze, the scribe's hands became numb, and the pen fell from his fingers. He wrote that in the margin of his manuscript. Let me just give you a few other things before we take our break. Other notes were at the end of a book, as the traveler rejoices to see their home country, so also is the end of a book to those who toil. Another person wrote at the end of the book, thanks be to God. Another one wrote, whoever says, God bless the soul of the scribe, God will bless his soul. And another one said, mercy be to him who wrote, O Lord, wisdom to those who read, grace to those who hear, salvation to those who own. And sometimes at the end of the book, they will write down their name and the date, which is very valuable for us to be able to date the manuscript. Okay, let us take a 10-minute break. We'll take up here when we come back. Oh, right. At times, scribes would make conversational jottings in the margins of their manuscripts. A lot of times monks would take a vow of silence. They couldn't speak, but they could write. And I find this really fascinating. From a 9th century Latin manuscript, there were comments in the margin in Irish. It said, "It's cold today." Somebody else wrote, "It's natural, it is winter." The lamp gives bad light. It is time for us to begin to do some work. Well, this vellum is certainly heavy. Well, I call this vellum thin. I feel quite dull today. I don't know what's wrong with me. It's fascinating to see, what they're thinking so many centuries ago. In Hebrews 1:3, the original of Codex Vaticanus had the word phaneron, meaning manifesting. A corrector changed it to what is a better reading, pharon, meaning upholding or carrying along. A later scribe changed it back and wrote in the margin, "Most ignorant and wicked man, leave the original reading alone. Do not change it." Very interesting. Greenlee has made a visional chronology of the things that we've been talking about. And if you look at the top, it's the kind of material that was used, starting in the 1st century on the left, going to the 15th century on the right. You see, it begins with papyrus, and then it goes to vellum or parchment, and then it goes to paper. The pen that was used on the left side is the reed, and then it is replaced with the quill, a feather. The book form, way at the left side, is the scroll, and then that is replaced by the codex, the book form. And then the handwriting, we have uncial or majuscule manuscripts, and then that is replaced by the minuscule. So this is just sort of in one place. You can see the development of all 4 of these aspects. Let's look at the major manuscripts. What are the most important manuscripts of the New Testament? The papyri, these would be the major ones. 4, 64, and 67, they're probably all really from the same manuscript, but they are in different parts and they are in different places. They're from the mid to late 200s. Oops, sorry. P11 was the first papyrus manuscript ever published in modern textual criticism. It's published by Tischendorf in 1868. P45 is from the early 200s and was one of the largest gospel papyruses that we have. P46 has 86 leaves of the Pauline epistles from around the year 200. And P52, as we mentioned earlier, is the oldest manuscript that we have at this point. Metzger and Ehrman say about P52, although the extent of the verses preserved is so slight, in one respect, this tiny scrap of papyrus possesses quite as much evidential value as would the complete codex. Just as Robinson Crusoe, seeing but a single footprint in the sand, concluded that another human being with 2 feet was present on the island with him, So P52 proves the existence and use of the fourth gospel during the first half of the 2nd century in a provincial town along the Nile, far removed from its traditional place of composition, Ephesus in Asia Minor. Now, the point he's making here is that even though we don't have the whole manuscript, the fact that we have part of it shows that there was a whole manuscript. And are you familiar with this story of Robinson Crusoe? He was a man who got stranded on a desert island, and he thinks he's the only one on this island, but he finds footprints. And even though he only sees one footprint, that indicates that there's another person. And that person has two same thing with this little bit of a papyrus. It shows that there was a whole papyrus far removed from where this was originally written at a very early time. So they say, had this little fragment been the middle of the past, the 19th century, that school of New Testament criticism, which was inspired by, could not have argued that the fourth gospel was not composed until. There's also P60 that contains the Gospels, and P75 from the late 100s to the early 200s. And this is the earliest known manuscript we have of the major papyri. The major uncials or majuscules would be majuscule Aleph, designated by O1, or it's called Codex Sinaiticus. It's our only complete uncial manuscript of the entire New Testament, and at one time it had the entire Old Testament as well. The story of its acquisition is fascinating. Count Tischendorf, back in the 1800s, went to a monastery at the base of Mount Sinai. There he saw them using this manuscript to burn in their stove to keep warm. Imagine a manuscript, an ancient manuscript they're burning to keep warm. And so he got it from them. Maybe it wasn't done too ethically, some people say, but he was able to get it from them and took it to the Russian government. They paid for it, and then they sold it to the British Museum for £100,000. So most of the leaves now are in the British Museum. Codex A, or O2, Codex Alexandrinus, is a beautiful manuscript from the 400s. And then Codex B, or O3, Codex Vaticanus, also at one time had the complete Old and New Testaments, but now several books are missing from each of the Testaments. It's been in the Vatican since at least the 1400s. And two of the pioneers of textual criticism, Westcott and Hort, they valued B over all other manuscripts. In fact, there's one place where the only reading that they accepted was the B. B was the only one that had a certain reading, and they took that over all the other readings because they valued B so much. Do you have any questions or comments here? All right. Let's look at manuscript families, or we call them text types. There are basically 3 or maybe 4 manuscript families. On the left, we have the Alexandrian, and this is generally felt to be the best manuscripts. It comes from Alexandria, Egypt, where great care was taken in preserving the original wording. This family can be traced back to the 2nd century. So most textual critics would put a high value on the Alexandrian family, and some of the manuscripts are listed there in that bottom box. There's also the Western, and this comes primarily from Northern Africa, Italy, and France, although some manuscripts are from the East, and it contains some unusual readings, some paraphrases and additions. In fact, the Western version of the book of Acts is 10% longer than the Alexandrian. Does this mean that we shouldn't accept the Western manuscripts at all? Not really. There are probably a few places where it has the original reading, but normally it doesn't. Normally it's a later or at least a variation from the original reading. There's the Byzantine, also called the Syrian reading. And this family goes back to around AD 350. It's polished, it has smooth readings and conflations, and eventually it became the major text family of the Eastern Church. But it's clearly secondary. It's not original. It has been modified from the Alexandrian. The text has been reworked to make it better. Rather than preserving rough readings, difficult readings, it's been smoothed out to make it flow very smoothly. This is the text group that lies behind the Textus Receptus, which the King James is based on. Now, there are some textual scholars who value the Byzantine and think that the Byzantine is the best family. It's sort of like counting the numbers and seeing which one has the most, and that one's right, you know, counting manuscripts. There is a Facebook page called NT Textual Criticism, where there are a lot of people like that on there. A lot of King James only people that value the Textus Receptus, which is later, and the Byzantine family. Most major textual critics value the Alexandrian the most. Now, there is possibly another one, the Caesarean type on the far right there in the Gospels. Whether or not that exists is debated. And one person has made a map of where these are located, although today in textual criticism, this really isn't seen very much as valid because texts were moved from place to place, and it's really a lot more mixed up than this would indicate. And say that a scribe has an Alexandrian manuscript, and he also has a Byzantine manuscript, and he uses them both to make his new manuscript, then what do you call his new manuscript? It's a combination of the two. Now, the important thing about this whole process is that over time, changes crept in. When the copies were made. Now, there are different kinds of changes that crept in. Some were unintentional, mistaking one letter for another. For example, in 2 Peter 2:13, is it the word agapais, love feast, or is it apatais, meaning dissipation or deceptions? And if you look at the English translations, you'll see that some take one as original, others take the other as original. There's a faulty use of abbreviations. There came to be 15 standard abbreviations that were used in the New Testament manuscripts. They're called the nomina sacra. But one scribe may use his own set of abbreviations, and perhaps the next scribe doesn't know what it means. Now, here's an example. This page is from Codex G from the 9th century. Notice that it's an interlinear. It is the Greek New Testament, but right above the word is the Latin. Also notice at the bottom of the page, there's a little note. At the bottom of the page, it says, to come to Rome, much of trouble, little of profit. The thing thou seekest here, if thou bring it not with thee, thou findest not. You know, I think there's a lot of truth to that. There are people going all around the world trying to find happiness, but if they don't take it with them, they're not going to find it no matter where they go. Great folly, great madness, great ruin of sense, great insanity, since thou hast set out for death, that thou shouldst be in obedience to the Son of Mary. Now, if we look at the close-up of this page, you'll see there in the top picture, ho theos huios. That would, I think that, yeah, that would be huios. The one in the middle there is a theta, Greek theta, and then what looks like a C, it's the S. That is the abbreviation for God, theos. Instead of writing it all out, they abbreviate it that way. In the bottom one is the abbreviation for anthropon. And you can see AN omega N, and above it, the Latin homonym. So abbreviations would sometimes cause mistakes. They were skipping lines, homeoteteluton. And I know that we've all done that. When we've copied something, we find that we've skipped a line. Repeating a word, we call that dittography. That happens. Errors, omissions, leaving out a word, haplography, and errors of the ear. Now, we used to sing a chorus that went, trust and obey, believe him and say. It's, I believe God. It went, I believe God, it shall be done even as he says. Trust and obey, believe him and say, I believe God. Nice chorus, isn't it? But this part, you could interpret as, trust and obey, believe him and say, right? Trust and obey, believe him and say, right? So it's an error of the ear. It's what you hear. You hear the words, but what do they mean? Okay, do you understand what I'm saying? Let me just give you a minute to let that sink in. Okay, you can say the same words, but two different people can interpret it in different ways. Now I'm going to show you a video, and I hope this works. We'll see if it does. This is a sort of a little skit done. One person is supposed to be President George Bush, former president of the United States, with Condoleezza Rice, who was the Secretary of State. Okay, and they get words there mixed up. Hu, H-U, is the new leader of China, but he gets it mixed up, meaning WHO, who, okay, the English word who. The word yes, sir, he gets mixed up for being Yasser Arafat. And the word coffee, he gets mixed up meaning Kofi Annan, the president of the United Nations. Okay, so let me play it and we'll see if this is going to work. What happened to my thing down below? Okay, here we go.
Excuse me, doctor. Brother John P, can you see something in? Oh yeah, all right. Hey, doctor.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that.
No, we didn't
Yes.
see anything.
Yes.
You didn't
We
see
didn't-
anything?
Yes.
Did you hear it?
No.
Oh, sir.
No.
Doctor.
What
Yes.
happened? Ah,
Just the
Okay.
picture of the building.
just the picture of the building.
You,
Yeah.
Well, okay, hold on just a second. Well, I have share sound. Okay, let me put it on optimize for video clip. While I do this, I won't be able to see you. For some reason, it minimizes the pictures of everybody. But if you're not able to hear it, just say, we can't hear it, okay? Okay, we'll start it now.
Mr. President, Condoleezza Rice is here to sing it.
Can you
Good,
hear
send
it?
her in.
Yes, sir. Morning, Mr. President.
Oh, Condoleezza, nice to see you. What's happening?
Well, Mr. President, I have the report here about the new leader in China.
Great, Condi, lay it on me.
Can you hear it?
yes, now we can hear.
Okay, okay.
Mr. President, who is the new leader of China?
Well, that's what I want to know.
Well, that's what I'm telling you, Mr. President.
Well, that's what...
Oops.
But I'm asking you, Condi, who is the new leader of China?
Yes.
I mean the feller's name.
Hugh.
The guy in China.
Hugh.
The new leader of China.
Hugh.
The Chinaman.
Hugh is leading China, Mr. President.
What are you asking me for?
I'm telling you, Hugh is leading China.
Well, I'm asking you, Condi, who is leading China?
That's the man's name.
That's whose name?
Yes.
Will you or will you not tell me the name of the new leader of China?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Arafat is in China. I thought he was in the Middle East.
That's correct, sir.
Then who's in China?
Yes, sir.
Yasser's in China?
No, sir.
Then who is?
Yes, sir.
Yasser?
No, sir.
Connie, you're starting to piss me off now, and it's not 'cause you're black, neither. I need to know the name of the new leader of China, so I want you to get me the Secretary General of the United Nations on the phone.
Coffee, Annan?
No, thanks. And Condi, call me George. Stop with that Ebonics crap.
You want coffee?
No.
You don't want coffee?
No, but now you mention it, I could use a glass of milk. And then get me the UN.
Yes, sir.
Not Yasser, the guy at the United Nations.
Coffee.
Milk! Will you please make that call?
And call who?
Well, who's the guy at the UN?
No, who is the guy in China?
Will you stay out of China?
Yes, sir.
And stay out of the Middle East. Just get me the guy at the UN.
Coffee.
All right, with cream and 2 sugars. Now get on the phone.
Hello. Rice here.
Rice, good idea. And get a couple of egg rolls, too, Condi. Maybe we should send some to the guy in China and the Middle East. Can you get Chinese food in the Middle East? I don't know.
Okay. Now, you were able to hear it, huh?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. Now, that is an illustration of mishearing. You hear it, but you think it's something else. And so if you're a scribe and you hear it and you write down and they say Kofi, K-O-F-I, and you write down C-O-F-F-E-E, that's going to cause a mistake in your manuscript. All right. Okay, let's go on. Here are some biblical examples of errors of hearing. In Romans 5:1, is it echomen, let us have, spelled with an omega? Or is it echomen, spelled with an omicron, we have? Is it let us have, or is it we have? Is it echomen or echomen? Well, it sounds the same. And when you look at the manuscripts of Romans 5:1, you see that there are both things. Koine Greek, in Koine Greek, several letters and diphthongs were pronounced alike. E, I, U, E, I, O, I, U, I, and long E, all were pronounced like long E, E. Because of that, very often the words for us and we, humes, and you, humes, get mixed up. So us and we is hemes, you is humes. And we see that several times. For example, 1 John 4:1, did John say, we write this to make our joy complete, hemon, or your joy complete, humon? And since they would have been pronounced the same way, it's difficult to tell. And the manuscripts are varied there. Okay, errors of memory. The sequence of words. You are writing one thing and you're reading one thing and writing another, and you get those mixed up in your memory. And then errors of judgment. For example, putting in marginal notes into the manuscript. That is perhaps what happened in John 5, 3b to 4. uh, the instance of the pool of Bethesda. It could be that telling about the angel stirring the waters was a marginal note that has gotten put into the text. The worst instance of errors of judgment that I know of is in Luke 3:23-38. One scribe copied a 2-column manuscript of Luke's genealogy of Jesus, but he copied it as if it were a 1-column manuscript. So in his genealogy, God is the son of Aram, and Phares was the father of all mankind. This is Codex 109 from the 14th century. There is then also the faulty division of words. Since there was no separation of words, one might divide the word at the wrong place in later years when the words were divided. What does this say? Somebody tell me what this says.
I saw abundance on the table.
Okay, I saw abundance on the table. What else could it say? I saw abundance on the table. What else could it say? Okay, what about I saw a bun dance on the table? I saw a bun dance on the table. Do you know what a bun is? Piece of bread, round piece of bread. So it could say, I saw abundance on the table, or it could say, I saw a bun dance on the table. Now we also, well, let me give you something else here. Okay, I might have to go out of this. Okay, what does this say?
God is nowhere.
God is now
Okay.
here.
All right. If you're an atheist,
Nowhere. The other thing is God is nowhere, and
Indeed, God is nowhere.
okay, if you're an atheist, it is God is nowhere. If you're a Christian, it is God is now here. Right? So it just depends on how
Now
you
here.
define the word. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Now
God is now here. Yeah.
That's right. Okay, let me erase this because it will stay on there if I don't. Okay. Now we have some examples of that in Scripture. In 1 Timothy 3:16, homologumen hos mega. We acknowledge how great. The ESV here says, great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of godliness. So the ESV takes it to be this divided this way. But the NIV is beyond all question the mystery hold on here a minute. Beyond all question, the mystery from which true godliness springs is great. So they take it homologumenos mega, confessedly great. So it all depends on how you change the words. The same thing in Mark 10:40. In the NIV, it says, these places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. And the key phrase there is al ois hetoi mastai. It is for those for whom it has been prepared. But it also could be alois hetoi mastai, which would be it has been prepared for others. So you could read it either way, depending on how you divide the words. Okay, so all of these are unintentional changes, but there were also intentional changes that happened. We have supposed corrections of misspellings. So a scribe might think, hey, they misspelled this. I'm going to change it and make it right. Grammatical corrections to make them more literary. An example of that would be Revelation 1:4. Grace and peace to you from him who is and was and who is to come. In the wrong case. It's probably intentional on the part of the author, but some. Thirdly, there are changes to remove historical difficulties. The three different versions of Paul's conversion in Acts. You know, some people harmonizations of quotations in the Lord's Prayer. Very closely related to that are harmonistic corruptions. And what we call conflation of readings. 3, some manuscripts say, continuing in the temple, blessing God. Other manuscripts, and then not wanting to leave anything out, some manuscripts say, continuing in the temple, blessing and praising God. If they changed, they probably wouldn't intentionally leave something out. They would include everything. That's the way it normally happens. And then finally, we have doctrinal alterations. An example of that would be John 5:7, where it says, there are 3 that bear record in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit, and those 3 are one. Now, that is the doctrine of the Trinity, but it wasn't in the original text. Marcion excised, took out portions took out part of Paul's letters. And so these are the kinds of errors that crept in. We'll stop here and we'll take up here next time. Do you have any questions or comments?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes,
I have
Namge.
seen some assignment on the Moodle. So do we have to do those assignment too?
You're breaking up and it's.
I have seen assignment to be done on the Moodle. Assignment, because it also says no need to do. I didn't understand that.
Okay, I'm sorry. Was anybody else able to type quite bad? Namge, could you put it in the chat? Could you put your question in the chat? That probably would be better. All right, and let me go. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, Namge, you said, do we have to do the assignment in Moodle? And I'm trying to think what that is. I think the only other assignment was for the quiz that's coming up in, you see what date we have for that.
Because if we follow in the Moodle, sir, we have like some assignment in there.
Okay, I don't remember it, so I'll have to check it out. So
Okay.
Go ahead and you don't need to do anything now, and I'll just tell you next time.
It means like we just follow in syllabus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Okay, sir.
I'll check out the Moodle and see what that is, guys, 'cause I don't remember.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Any other questions? Comments?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, I'll give you a high five and I say I'll see you next week. God bless you.
See you next week, sir.
All
Thank you,
right.
sir.
Take care.
Oh, it gives me